Paying for business school is expensive, but what if you didn't have to go it alone? That's where Juno comes in. Juno brings thousands of students together to make lenders compete for our business, which means you get a lower rate than you could on your own. It's free, it's fast, and it's already helped more than 230,000 members secure over $1 billion in student loans at better rates. Join today at juno.us/M7A.
The GMAT really is just to show that you can meet the bar, but it's not going to be the decision maker as to whether you get into these schools. I think it's so much more important on the story that you tell, why you want to go to that school, what you plan to do in the future.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to How Did You Get In? Today, we are interviewing Alex Choi, who's a graduate of Wharton MBA class of 2019, also a dual degree with the Harvard Kennedy School. And right now, Alex is pursuing the entrepreneurial lifestyle. He's the founder of YourNegotiations.com, consulting company that helps job seekers negotiate their job offers and make more money. So we'll definitely hear a little bit more about that later on. But for now, would love it, Alex, if you could kick us off by telling us more about your background. Where are you from? Where did you go to undergrad? And what were you doing before business school?
Yeah, Alex, Julia, thank you so much for having me. Very excited for our conversation. So in terms of my background, I'm originally from Orange County, California, which is where I grew up for the most part. And for undergrad, I went to the Air Force Academy in Colorado. And so before business school, I started my professional career, active duty Air Force. I was an acquisition officer. So that's essentially working with defense companies and to develop military software systems. In the Air Force, I also had a stint. I like to joke, I had two extremely opposite experiences in the military. On one end, with acquisitions, I was working a typical desk job. Essentially, it was like I would go into a very corporate office. The only difference is that I would wear my camo uniform to the office. But I also, in the military, spent some time. I was on the Air Force parachute team. And so I was a military freefall skydive instructor. I taught other military personnel the basic skydiving course and was also on the demonstration team. So I traveled the country, jumped into air shows, jumped into stadiums before football games and sporting events, and essentially traveled around as the face of the Air Force. I did that before business school. And I will say, while I was in the military, within the first 2 years of my active duty service, I kind of started thinking whether I was actually going to stay in the military and do the full 20-year full military career thing, or actually transition out into a new career into the private sector. So about 2 years in is when I started to think about, should I go to business school? Should I apply and transition out and help that actually get me into a career transition, which I'm happy to go full into detail on, but that's a quick flyover of my background.
Well, we love a good pun, so thank you for the flyover.
I thought of that right at that moment. I was like, I'm going to slide this in. Yeah,
it was good. No, that's amazing. You must be very popular at parties for the stories that you tell about going from like desk job, to 0 to 100 to then jumping out of planes. I am curious. We certainly want to hear what got you to pursue an MBA, but maybe just before we go there, what was your interest in going into the Air Force? Like, how did you end up on that path? And I'm sure that will inform some of your MBA journey as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy since I was in middle school. I first learned about it through my uncle in Korea because he lived near a U.S. military base. He'd see a lot of the fighter jets there. And so my original interest was to become a fighter pilot. I thought that was super cool. Also, my father he's retired Marine Corps, a Korean Marine Corps. And so I've just kind of come from a military tradition. So all through high school, I did everything I could to just be prepared to apply to the Air Force Academy. And then senior year, as I was doing my medical exams, I actually found out that I'm colorblind. And then so I couldn't actually fly. For me, though, by then I had learned so much about the Air Force and going to the academy and how there's so many different career fields. And I still just really wanted to join the military, serve my country. And that actually didn't deter me. I wasn't devastated at all because I knew that there were many things I could do within the military. So I still applied, and I'm very happy that I did. I absolutely loved and cherished my military experience.
Wow. When life throws you a curveball, you adapt and get to where you're meant to be and follow the path that's right for you. So
Yeah, you jump out of the plane instead, right?
Yeah, so I found another way to fly, I guess.
still a way to tap into the adrenaline seeking part of you. So you were thinking about an MBA 2 years into your post undergrad experience. When did it become more serious? When did you start doing the test prep and kind of what was
Yeah.
that journey?
Yeah, well, so the reason why I started thinking about an MBA and career transitioning is because so even throughout when I was at the Air Force Academy and also active duty, I've always just been very entrepreneurial. I always had different side hustles going on and kind of looking for cool opportunities to just I don't know, try out different things and different products and projects. While I was in the military, I actually on the side founded a startup. Essentially, it was a creator brand collaboration service where I connected extreme sport athletes just because I kind of came from that world with skydiving. So, extreme sport athletes all around the world with different retail brands that were looking to sponsor them. They would send their products to these athletes. They would take really cool photos and videos of that, and then they'd get these products for free. So it was kind of like a value exchange. And then these companies would have all this incredible content of their stuff being like jumped out of an airplane or like in the Swiss Alps with skiers or whatnot. I did this in 2013, a few years into my active duty. And I think that really kind of, it scratched my entrepreneurial itch. And when I started thinking, okay, at the 5 year point of active duty, that's actually my minimum commitment for the military for having gone to the Air Force Academy. So that's kind of the point at which many people start considering, should I actually leave the military or actually just stay in? So as I was approaching my 5 year point, 2 to 3 years in, I really started evaluating my different options. If I stay in the military, this is what it'll look like. If I leave, it seems like the best way to do that is to go to an MBA program, which can set me up very well to transition into a new career.
And did you have anyone that you saw a few years ahead of you who did that path?
Yeah, within the military, there's this cohort of people who tend to follow this path where they do their service. They may stay a little longer, but they apply to top programs and then they fully transition into consulting or tech, finance, and just set themselves up for a great private sector career. And so there were definitely, when I actually was visiting a lot of these business schools, I would connect with the Veterans Club, and some of these those students at the time, or even graduates, they'd become my mentors, and I'd share with them my application. They'd give me feedback, and it kind of is just this long life cycle of military veterans who go to top MBAs who then go off into different industries, and it's a very tight community, and I'm very thankful that I had access to.
Yeah, we have a joke at HBS where it was the three M's: married, Mormon, and military. I think there was a very strong military contingent. So it's interesting to hear that was true across the M7 schools. And just hearing your story and what you were up to, I could think of so many different potential essay topics and how you created your angle. But when you went to go approach your essay and talk about your value, like what was your narrative? How did you craft the story for the MBA?
Yeah, that's such a great question because I feel like the military veterans who often have the best shot at getting into a top MBA program, you either have very exciting war stories like you're special forces or a fighter pilot, and just have kind of extremely unique stories. And for myself, I mean, I did have the skydiving experience, and I did reference some of that. But then a lot of my military experience was working on the business side of the Air Force, directly with defense contractors, aerospace companies. And so I thought this actually is an opportunity to really show how having worked with these companies really gave me an insight into also how the private sector works. And so my approach, my narrative was how do I actually further distinguish myself from just the other military applicants, where when I'm not special forces, when I'm not a fighter pilot, I wasn't a SEAL or anything. And there were actually three aspects that I really highlighted. So one was entrepreneurship. I talked about what I had shared earlier about that startup that I founded, and then the other two were leadership and also commitment to service or volunteer work. The leadership aspect, while I was also in the military, I was involved in kind of these leadership conferences that happen around the world, and I would actually volunteered. And these were taught by top professors. I kind of knew some of the people who were involved in putting these conferences on because they did an experimental course when I was at the Air Force Academy. So I stayed in touch. I found these opportunities to go to some other countries and do that. My best friend from the Air Force Academy, he was an international cadet from Kenya. And so we actually did some work in Africa and went to Kenya where we worked in the slums. We also brought like our leadership training that we did to and actually taught and held workshops there. We helped start some very, very grassroots businesses. And so that was kind of my commitment to service, the volunteer work. I also, during the military, also consulted to some small businesses in Cambodia and when I had visited there on vacation, we had some family friends and connected in that way. So all that to say, I wanted to make myself stand out from other military veterans by highlighting the leadership, entrepreneurship, as well as commitment to service, volunteer work. And I really tried to tie that into a cohesive story.
Wow. There's so much in that just to like highlight for listeners that you referenced that we talk about for the application. One is not only were you working and clearly very busy, but you managed to have incredibly strong extracurriculars, right? Those are not extracurriculars that someone just sort of slapped on at last minute. Those are clear things that you devoted a ton of time to. Two, the international exposure, I think, is huge. Shows your ability to go, extrapolate, they can go do business in other countries. And the third thing I'm hearing too is I think people from a military background have to make a really strong case that not only they need the business education, but they have enough business acumen that they're going to succeed. And so you touched on all three of those things in your narrative, which I think is incredibly impressive.
Thank you. And I mean, all of it was very true. These were things that I had a genuine interest in and actually how I spent my time outside of my day job for many years. So it really lined up in such a way where it was easy to, I mean, it took a long time for me to sort of figure that out, put it into a cohesive narrative that would fit in a MBA application essay and being able to speak to it in interviews. But once I really nailed down the nuts and bolts of the story, I realized that this is actually a very powerful narrative that could resonate with an MBA admissions committee.
What would you say was the most challenging part of applying? Was it trying to like narrow it down into that cohesive narrative, or was it the interview process, or even studying for the tests in the first place?
Yeah, great question. I would say that cohesive narrative did take me many months. I mean, the way that I explain it right now, it probably was like, oh, wow, that makes so much sense. But to be able to put all those pieces together actually took a very, very long time because I was also wondering if I should really lean into the skydiving, that aspect where I taught other military members. So I did reference that. It wasn't a huge focus though, just because I realized if I'm going to an MBA program, this is also, when you apply to an MBA, it's not just about the school, but also what you're going to do for the rest of your career. And so it felt like it would resonate a lot more when I'm applying, as well as just kind of what would work and actually what really matters, like beyond the 2 years of the MBA, my past experience working with defense companies, also consulting to small businesses abroad, all this actually really ties into kind of what I would do for the long term, even after I leave the military. I think from a very tactical perspective, I think a big challenge was just sequencing out how I'm going to be applying. So getting the GMAT out of the way, and then how many months am I going to devote to actually writing the essays? And I had to be very strict and regimented with my schedule I had to like plan a whole year out on which months am I devoting to the GMAT, which months am I devoting to narrative building, and then actually the application itself. I had an extra logistical challenge where I had to decide and tell the military if I'm going to get out or not, even before I submitted my applications. And so I felt like, so it was definitely kind of a risky move, but I felt a lot of conviction that I am going to leave the military. I love my time, but I'm going to transition out. And so I had to pull the trigger and tell the military. And actually, once you give the military the heads up, you kind of get deprioritized in terms of like the best next assignments and kind of leadership, really helping you with your career development, all that. Not to say that like I was just kind of cast out, like the military doesn't do that, but it for sure what added some stress that I needed to make the decision before even if I knew I was getting in anywhere.
And how did that, sort of knowing the stakes, how did that change and make you think about where you applied? Like, what was your list of schools that you applied to? What was your strategy with that?
Yeah, so my thinking was if I'm going to fully transition out of the military and actually just leave everything that I've known up to this point since starting college, I only want to do it if it's worth it for me. And for me, my calculus was getting into a top MBA program. And so, there are many, many strong business schools, but on my end, I was really just targeting the top programs. So that kind of factored into my decision. Also, the fact that I had to tell the military even before I submitted applications, it really made it very real for me. And I think that was a huge motivator because I kind of walked through a one-way door. And there at that point, there was no turning back. So yeah, that was kind of my thinking. I applied to Wharton, HBS, MIT Sloan, Tuck, and then Harvard Kennedy School. I did all round one since I kind of knew at least a year in advance that I was applying. So I just made sure I do all that work ahead of time. But it was definitely a grind applying to five schools at one time, all in the same round.
You were doing this all solo, right? Like you didn't have a admissions consultant, is that correct?
So I actually did work with an admissions consultant, but just for 2 or 3 of the schools that I applied to. And then I figured I'd be able to kind of apply those learnings to the rest of the applications, which is what I did. And my decision making for using a consultant was, once again, I'm like, I've fully taken the leap. I've already jumped off the cliff in terms of, telling the military I'm leaving. I am not going to waste any opportunity to increase my chances of getting in because I'm just putting all my cards on this. So for me, it made sense, and I thought it was very, very helpful. It's a personal decision for everybody. It's definitely possible to rely on alumni networks, other veteran graduates. But for me personally, it made a lot of sense, and I'm glad I did it.
I think that's a really good point of the all-in mentality. I think it probably shows in the actual application the people who really want it and kind of haven't even considered another option versus the people who are like, I could not. So, and I think it helps the mindset. And I imagine it really helped you stay regimented. And otherwise, you might not have been able to apply to all the schools that you did.
And a question we get all the time is, how am I supposed to study for the GMAT when I have everything else going on? And clearly you managed to study for the GMAT, do all of these extracurriculars and apply to 5 or 6 schools. What was your strategy with the GMAT specifically? Did you tackle that earlier? How did you fit that in with everything else you had going on?
Yeah. So for me, I did everything as a progression. So I didn't want to be thinking about the GMAT while I'm working on the applications. And since I knew I was going to apply at least a year in advance, I dedicated the first several months of that prep just towards GMAT. I didn't even think about the schools or anything. My singular goal there was just to do well on the test. I took it twice. I think the second time I took it, I got a 710, which is like pretty strong score. But it was also, when you see the averages of these top schools, you're like, man, you feel like you can always do better. But I think the GMAT really is just to show that you can meet the bar, but it's not going to be the decision maker as to whether you get into these schools. I think it's so much more important on the story that you tell, why you want to go to that school, what you plan to do in the future. And so I knew that the narrative piece was really important, which is where most of my time actually went towards. But the GMAT portion was probably just around like 4 very concentrated months of studying and preparing for the exam.
Chef's kiss. That is the right approach and the right attitude on the GMAT for everyone listening. That is like the best in class way to do things. Thank you for sharing that.
And I want to dive into the dual degree decision. It's enough to go back to school full time for 2 years. What was your thinking of going back to do the full 3 years across Harvard, Kennedy, and Wharton?
Yeah. So for me, Having come from a background of public service, when I was applying to schools, I actually, even though I felt like I wanted to go into the private sector, I did still feel that there's a chance that I would want to do something related to public service. I didn't really know what that looked like, but just to give myself that option, it felt like doing the dual degree with the Kennedy School, where there's a very big focus on that public leadership, public service. Coupling that with an MBA would actually give myself the most opportunity and options. And so that was my main thinking. Also, just that I genuinely had an interest in public service, politics, doing consulting to small businesses and developing markets. And I felt like the Kennedy School really hit on that piece. Alex, you bring up a great point about opportunity costs because it's an extra year of school. The dual degree is 3 years. I did have some GI Bill that actually helped cover tuition, so that definitely helped factor into my decision. But was even after I got into the Kennedy School, I actually was really thinking through: does it actually even make sense for me still to do the dual degree? It's an extra year where I'm not in the job market, an extra year of tuition cost, and a year of work experience and all that. So but after I visited the Kennedy School, really just kind of understood the program, it just felt like such a valuable experience that in the long term, when I look back, that I'll be very happy that I did. Also, the final piece on this is I felt like the Kennedy School with an MBA program where ultimately I went to Wharton, the two networks, the value of the network of these schools is such a huge piece as to why it makes sense to go to these graduate programs. And the two networks actually have very little overlap. And so I thought that for the long term, I'm really, really broadening my network, potential opportunities into other certain careers or different communities or different sectors. So that was also part of my decision-making process.
Maybe moving into, past the actual application, you burned the bridges, you got in. Was it worth it? Are you glad you went with the decision that you did?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm really glad I chose Wharton. It just was the perfect place for me. And I'm really glad I did this, transition out of the military, went to a top program and into my career. I ultimately ended up getting into Tuck, Wharton, and MIT Sloan, all really great programs. And when I went to the welcome weekends, Wharton resonated with me most. I think the reason is because I wanted to actually go to a place with a big class. And so of those places, Wharton has one of the biggest classes along up there with HBS of the top programs. And it seemed to me that Wharton did a very good job of having a super well-oiled machine, a very robust program around every aspect of the MBA experience. So academics, recruiting, and kind of career placement, as well as then the MBA life, the social extracurriculars, interests and stuff. But then there's also a lot of opportunity to kind of choose your own adventure and actually really scale and kind of divide up however you want to create your MBA experience. If you really want to focus on academics, you can make that 80% of your experience and do the recruiting and all that. If you really care about career transition and getting a great job, then you can actually focus on that. Whereas there are other programs that have strengths in certain areas, but maybe that's actually just a singular focus of that school. For me, it just seemed like there was a lot of flexibility with a lot of support, no matter kind of what direction I wanted to take my experience. And I thought Wharton did that really, really well. And in hindsight, having gone through it, I think they really did.
And how did you choose to allocate that time between academics, entrepreneurial pursuits, recruiting?
My biggest focus was that career transition. So having left the military, and actually I was very focused on recruiting for tech and getting working in product or kind of just within the tech world. It really helped knowing that was having decided that even before I started recruiting, because just how you spend your time is also just as important as what you're not spending your time on. And so I didn't spend any time going to any of the coffee chats or anything in any other industry except tech. That's all I did. It really helped me with my focus. And to be completely frank, I would say the academics part wasn't the most important for me. Not that, I did all the work and everything, but I went to the MBA program also just to build my network because just having come from only a military background, I really wanted to actually broaden, my connections to other industries. And so Wharton also is just a very social and super fun environment. I had an absolute blast participating in all the extracurriculars. I did the leadership venture program. So I would lead leadership programs in other countries. I did many other like kind of those sorts of like affinity and interest events that it really rounded out my experience. And I I miss being a Wharton student very much.
That resonates. Yeah, Alex and I were also not academics were not the top priority, so we can understand that completely. You mentioned you spent a lot of your time focused. You ignored the coffee chat invites from the consulting groups and all of those others, focused on tech. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to since. Did you follow your tech dreams? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I was a product marketing MBA intern at Instagram. And so I did get in, kind of was able to break into tech. I returned to Instagram after as a PMM. I worked there for about 2 years. I left Instagram, and then I also did product marketing at a startup, a company called Alchemy. They're a Web3 infrastructure company, hyper growth Series C startup. So I felt like I got both the big tech experience as well as working at very fast paced startups. All the while, again, kind of bringing it full circle, I just always had that entrepreneurial itch and always just looking for opportunities to try the founder thing. My wife, Gerta, worked previously at LinkedIn, salary.com, did a very similar tech journey. She also worked in venture capital. She was working, just exploring the founder journey as well. When I left my last job at Alchemy, we actually realized we're like, should we actually try founding something together? And so we started a consulting company called yournegotiations.com. And essentially we work with job seekers and help them negotiate their job offers and basically make more money. And the reason we founded this, so Gerta, my wife, actually is the original negotiations expert. She's honestly the best negotiator I've ever met in my entire life. For many years has informally helped a lot of our friends increase their offers. And so having worked in tech, we also just knew that creating an online business around an expertise and selling a digital good like a course or digital service, that there was just a lot of opportunity. My brother-in-law, who's an HBS grad, he worked in this industry, and he showed both of us just the opportunity. And so we're like, well, we already have the expertise part down. Let's actually test to see if there's a demand for this. So we started our business as an experiment. I was former Meta, former Instagram. So at the time, there were many layoffs, and I'm in a lot of ex-Meta alumni communities. Many people were applying to new jobs. And so I posted there, I said, hey, it seems like people are applying to jobs. Lots of questions being asked around negotiations here. My wife, Gerta, is a negotiations expert. If there's interest, we're happy to do like a free 30-minute Q&A. Anyone can dial in. And I think within 24 hours, there were hundreds of people who commented and reacted to it and asking us when it is. And so we held this a week later, and actually out of that session, there were a few people who followed up and said, hey, I'm going through a live negotiation. I could really use some coaching. Can I hire you to just tell me what to do and say? And so that's essentially how our business was born.
What an amazing way to test into product market fit. I feel like, from the startup classes that I took at HBS, you very much followed like what you should do. And that's awesome. And so glad that it's clearly working.
I gotta look into your website so I can negotiate for my job better. Talk about an incredibly value add activity. I am curious, how did your Wharton experience, either through the coursework potentially on negotiations or through access to entrepreneurial like toolkits, how did your Wharton experience help you as you launched this?
So I did take some entrepreneurship courses at Wharton. And also, when I was at the Kennedy School, I was very involved with Harvard Innovation Labs. I was working on a startup there with some of my classmates. So that experience really taught me Alex, I think you kind of was mentioning this around doing things in a right way, where you actually just test an idea to see if there's actually an opportunity or a market there. And then if you're able to validate that, then really investing versus investing a lot of resources and time up front, building what you think is the right thing. And then you put it out there and maybe no one's going to end up use it. And all that time was wasted. And so I think a lot of the courses that I took at Wharton really instilled in me just kind of this different model of approaching, where it's like kind of that lean startup process where you test, you experiment, you learn, and then you adjust and continue to grow from there. So that was very helpful. And of course, actually, Some of our clients have been some of my Wharton classmates. They've pinged us, and we've worked with them. And we also primarily work with a lot of people in tech, finance, consulting, many of the typical kind of Wharton career trajectories. So having gone to Wharton and having that MBA network, that's actually where a lot of people learn about us, and we get actually now a majority of our business through referrals. So even if people I know don't necessarily need our support, very often get a lot of people just referring us their friends or their former coworkers as they're applying for new jobs.
Right now, I believe it's bootstrapped, but would you consider tapping into that Wharton network if you needed to fundraise in the future?
So we are bootstrapped. We don't have any investors. It's just Gerta and me. We do have a small team. We have a part-time assistant. We have a fractional chief of staff, but this chief of staff also has her own entire team of video editors, copywriters, social media managers who we have access to. So our team is all part-time. It's so funny because when I really thought about entrepreneurship in the early days from when I was in the military, and even actually after Instagram, and I was thinking about what kind of founder thing I should do. Living in San Francisco, you're often sold this narrative that the only way to succeed as a founder is to go the tech-enabled, VC-backed route, where you need to raise millions of dollars, create some sort of app, and all these things. And of course, that's definitely a potentially lucrative and very appealing path. But there's also a lot of trade-offs as well. You're going to be working very, very intensely. Perhaps it'll impact your health. A lot of times, I don't want to say all the time, but in many cases, sometimes if you can end up raising millions and you don't end up building a product that gets market adoption. And then you're also on the hook with investor money and these things. That's very, very viable path. I fully respect it. But once I really started thinking about how I wanted my founder path to be, I realized at this point in my life, I really care about autonomy and actually having full control over my life. And of course, Garrett and I work very intensely on our business, but the fact that we fully work for ourselves and we are in full control of not just the business decisions, but even just our every workday as well. Just having that control is the best part of this job.
It's clear you've been really thoughtful about it. You're in a position where it's easier for you than most to be able to raise money simply because of the networks that you have. But the fact that you were thoughtful about, it's autonomy, it's being able to live my life the way that I want to and not be beholden to these investors. I think that's really a thoughtful approach. And it sounds like it makes a lot of sense for you and it's working out really well. Curious as you think about, the next 5-10 years, what's the vision?
Yeah, honestly, I really hope that this is the end game, that Gerta and I just continue building this business, we scale it. And also, it's just been super rewarding to be doing this kind of work because we really help the job seekers. And we've actually been approached by companies to help them recruit against candidates. We've also even been approached about a potential acqui-hire for us to kind of work with that. It was a company in the HR space and we kind of fully take over the negotiations aspect. But for us, we just love how rewarding it is to actually help job seekers. And on average, we've increased people's offers by 90K on top of the initial. In many cases, we've increased by 6 figures, and just helping people earn a lot more money, actually them seeing their value, their worth. We even had a client who said, wow, like because of just all the extra money that I was able to negotiate, I feel safe like having another child. And like when they said that, we were just like, oh my gosh, like just the impact that we have in actually helping people in this way has been one of the best parts of this business. So long term, like I hope that this is just what Garrett and I continue to do. We build this business and just, keep helping people earn more money.
That's amazing. Maybe wrap up and hear your last piece of advice. I'd be remiss because I think there's a lot of people listening to this podcast who might also benefit from what you're doing. Do you want to put a plug in? How can people find you?
Yeah, so they can learn about us through our company name, yournegotiations.com. Garrett and I actually also just started a YouTube channel and podcast. So we put out weekly episodes where we talk about negotiations. We also just kind of chit chat about our lives in San Francisco. And we also have a weekly email newsletter. So all of that can be found on the website. We also post every day on LinkedIn, lots of free negotiations content, tips, tactics, strategies, and stuff like
We'd love to hear, in looking back on your journey, what advice would you give to someone who's sitting listening to this and thinking about, shouldn't I get an MBA?
that. Yeah. I would say really think about it if an MBA will help you achieve your future goals. I think I've met a lot of people and who either even within my program or people who are thinking about MBAs, the reason why they want to go is because they just think it's just kind of what you do next. You really have to think about the opportunity cost in an MBA program, being out of the workforce for 2 years, not having a full-time compensation for 2 years. You need to include that in your calculus. It's not just the tuition cost, right? And so you have to think about, what is the trade-off I'm making if I go to an MBA program? I think it absolutely better be worth whatever your future plans are. Don't just go because it seems like it's kind of like what everyone around my age or my peers or at my company are doing. So I think that would be the biggest thing. There were some cases where people asked me like, hey, should I apply or not? And I'm kind of hearing through their reasoning. Like, my advice was, I don't think you should apply to an MBA program. I think you should just stay in your career. You're doing really well. There are opportunities to grow in that way. And maybe you could revisit an MBA, doing an executive MBA later on in your career or whatnot. But I actually don't think it's the right choice for you. Not that like they can't cut it or they can't get in, but I just really think it's so important that you need to be able to explain to yourself, is it actually tied to what I care about and where I want to take my career and my life?
That's such a good point to end on. It's not for everyone, and it's a big investment.
And even though we are MBA consultants, we also believe you have to have the right reason to get an MBA, and it's not right for everyone. So I think we both really appreciate your methodical approach, the amount of time and dedication you put into the application process, and then clearly what you've gotten out of it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation. It was super nice to meet you, Julia and Alex.
Yeah, you might be hearing from me soon if I've got to negotiate on the next job offer. Pleasure to meet you and talk to you.
Thank you.